Friends, welcome to my channel. Tonight, we dive into one of the strangest, darkest, and most important mysteries of our time. A mystery that begins in the ruins of a war that should have ended long ago. Imagine this, a war that's now in its fourth year. A Russia that's bleeding, exhausted, isolated, and sinking under the weight of sanctions. Its economy bending, its soldiers dying, its weapons rusting. And yet it keeps fighting. Across the border, Ukraine still stands. A nation that was supposed to fall in 3 days has survived nearly 4 years. Its cities still wave the blue and yellow flag. Its people still fight. Its army still pushes forward. And somehow, despite everything, it hasn't collapsed. And then comes the twist, the part that makes this story truly unbelievable. The President of the United States, eager to end this grinding war, quietly offers Vladimir Putin the kind of peace deal that no dictator in modern history has ever been offered. A deal that would let Russia keep some of the land it seized. A deal that would block Ukraine from joining NATO. A deal that would let Putin declare victory, even after losing hundreds of thousands of men. But what does Putin do? He says no. No to peace. No to victory. No to ending the bloodshed. And that's where our story begins tonight. Because the real question is not how this war started. The real question is why it won't stop. Why does Vladimir Putin, a man drowning in losses, refuse to take a deal that gives him everything he claimed to want? Why does he reject peace when peace could save him? Most people call him irrational. Others say he's obsessed with Ukraine. Some believe he's trapped in his own lies. But none of those answers fully explain the truth. Because what's happening here is not just about ideology or pride. It's about survival. Putin doesn't fear losing the war. He fears what comes after it ends. Because when the guns fall silent, when the propaganda fades, and when the soldiers return home, peace will reveal something Putin cannot allow the world, or his own people, to see that his empire is hollow, his system broken, and his power built on lies. So tonight, we're going to uncover the truth behind that fear. We'll explore the 4 forces that trap Putin inside this endless war, forces political, economic, psychological, and global. We'll expose the structure of a system that cannot survive peace. And we'll answer the question the world keeps asking. Why won't he stop? Friends, stay till the end, because this story will change how you see the war, how you see Russia, and how you see the world itself. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what you think, because tonight we're pulling back the curtain on the war that refuses to end. Friends, to understand why Vladimir Putin refuses peace, we have to step back to the beginning, not to 2022 when tanks rolled into Ukraine, but to the mindset that made that invasion possible. Because this war, at its core, was never about land. It was about control, political, emotional, and historical control. When the first Russian convoys crossed the border, Putin didn't just want a slice of territory. He wanted Ukraine itself, its government, its culture, its future. He wanted to erase it as a nation. He sent armored columns toward Kyiv, paratroopers toward Hostomel airport, and missiles toward the Ukrainian capital. That wasn't a move to protect Russian speakers or to keep NATO away. That was regime change. That was a man trying to capture a country and rewrite history in his own image. And when that plan failed, when Ukrainian resistance shocked the world, Putin didn't back down. He doubled down. He declared 4 Ukrainian regions part of Russia forever. Forever. That's not the word of a man looking for an exit. That's the word of a man locking himself inside his own war. So why keep fighting when defeat is clear and the costs are crushing? Because peace for Putin doesn't mean victory. It means exposure. Let's break this down into what I call the 4 traps, the 4 realities that make peace impossible for Putin. Trap 1, the political threat. A free, democratic, successful Ukraine sitting right next to Russia is a nightmare for Putin. It's not about borders, it's about example. If Ukraine thrives, if it grows, reforms, joins the European Union, and shows the world that democracy can work in a Slavic country, then Putin's entire argument to his own people collapses. For 20 years, he's told Russians that democracy means chaos, that Western influence means destruction, that only strong, centralized control can protect them. But if Ukraine proves the opposite, then millions of Russians will start to wonder, why not us? A peaceful, prosperous Ukraine is like a mirror that Putin doesn't want his people to look into, because it shows them what they could have been and what he took from them. Trap 2E, the economic trap. Over 3 years of war have turned Russia's economy into something almost unrecognizable. Factories run 24 hours a day making weapons instead of products people actually need. The budget for defense has exploded. Nearly half of Russia's federal spending is now for the military. Think about that. Every second ruble goes to war. Every tank that rolls off an assembly line is another paycheck. Every missile built keeps someone's factory open. Peace would shut that machine down overnight. If the war stops, those contracts disappear. Wages vanish. Thousands lose jobs. Entire regions built on military production collapse. The illusion of economic stability, the idea that Russia can endure sanctions, would shatter. In short, war is what's keeping Russia's economy alive. Peace would kill it. Trap 3, the political fear. Inside the Kremlin, loyalty matters more than truth. Generals lie about battlefield progress. Ministers hide statistics. Advisors tell Putin what he wants to hear. Why? Because the moment someone delivers bad news, they disappear, literally, arrested, fired, or worse. This has created a system built on fear. No one dares to tell the truth. Everyone competes to flatter the leader. In such a system, peace is terrifying. Because peace brings scrutiny, it forces the truth into the open, the corruption, the failures, the lies. For men who built their careers on loyalty instead of honesty, peace means accountability. And accountability in Putin's Russia can be deadly. Trap 4, the Chinese leash. This is the part most people overlook. Russia no longer fights alone. Behind every Russian drone, every missile chip, every tanker full of oil, there's China. Nearly half of Russia's imports now come from Chinese factories. Its entire industrial base is being held together by Chinese equipment, Chinese financing, and Chinese spare parts. China doesn't want peace. Not yet. Beijing wants a weak, dependent Russia, a Russia too isolated to say no, too desperate to act independently. Every day this war drags on, Russia sinks deeper into China's grip. That means even if Putin wanted to end the war, he might not be able to. He's handcuffed to a partner that profits from his bleeding. Put all these traps together and you start to see the real picture. Peace is not Putin's off-ramp. Peace is his cliff. It's the moment everything he's built starts to fall apart. So when the world asks, why doesn't he just take the deal? The answer is painfully simple, because ending the war would destroy him faster than losing it slowly. And that's what makes this conflict so dangerous. It's not being driven by strategy anymore. It's being driven by survival instinct, by a man trapped in a maze of his own making. Even the peace deals being quietly offered behind the scenes aren't real options for him, because every agreement, every ceasefire, every compromise forces him to admit what he can't admit, that Russia didn't win, that Ukraine still stands. That all his talk about denazification, liberation, and defense was just propaganda for conquest. So in a way, Vladimir Putin is now fighting not just against Ukraine, but against time itself. He's prolonging the war to postpone the reckoning. And as long as that logic holds, as long as he fears peace more than war, then the world should expect exactly what we've seen. More attacks, more lies, more mobilization, and more loss. Friends, this is not a story of a war gone out of control. This is a story of a man who needs chaos to keep control. In the next section, we'll go deeper into the machinery of deception that surrounds Putin, the false reports, the doctored numbers, the fear inside his own ministries, and how that web of lies has become the fuel keeping this war alive. Friends, now that we understand why peace terrifies Putin, let's dive into the world he's built around himself. A world made of loyalty, fear, and illusion. Because the truth is, this war is not only being fought in the trenches of Ukraine, it's being fought inside the walls of the Kremlin. And inside those walls, reality no longer exists. When you rule by fear, people stop telling you the truth. They tell you what you want to hear. That's how dictatorships rot from the inside, not from foreign invasion, but from self-deception. Every autocracy eventually builds a mirror that reflects only the leader's own fantasies. And that's exactly what has happened in Putin's Russia. The men and women closest to him, generals, ministers, governors, have learned that honesty is dangerous. Mistakes are not forgiven. Failures are punished. If something goes wrong, someone must be blamed, and no one wants to be that person. So what happens? The information flowing upward becomes fake. Numbers get inflated. Victories get exaggerated. Losses disappear. Reports are rewritten until they sound good enough to survive the meeting. This is how Vladimir Putin, a man once obsessed with control, lost control of the truth. Take General Valery Gerasimov, Russia's chief of the general staff. He is one of the few people who briefs Putin directly on the war. But his reports, according to insiders and Western analysts, often bear little resemblance to what's actually happening on the ground. He'll walk into a meeting and announce that Russian forces have encircled a Ukrainian division, when in reality, the advance barely moved a few kilometers. He'll claim that 70% of a town has been captured, when satellite images show it's more like 20%. Even pro-Russian military bloggers who want Russia to win have started mocking these briefings as fantasy fiction. They know the truth. The front lines are barely moving, morale is low, and casualties are staggering. But inside the Kremlin bubble, none of that is allowed to exist. Now imagine being Putin sitting at the head of that table. Everyone around you nods, smiles, and agrees. They show you maps colored in red, charts of production growth, fake statistics that make the war look sustainable. It's not reality, it's theater. And Putin, after 2 decades in power, has become both the director and the audience of his own performance. But this system doesn't just distort the war. It also distorts the economy. Ministers tell Putin that sanctions have failed, that Russia's economy is booming, that the ruble is stable, that factories are thriving. And yes, there's activity, tanks, drones, ammunition, all being produced nonstop. But that's not growth, that's desperation. Economists inside Russia call it a wartime illusion. When a country builds things meant to be destroyed, it's not creating wealth, it's burning it. Every missile launched is money gone. Every destroyed tank is hours of labor erased. Yet the Kremlin calls it progress. Why? Because telling the truth would be suicidal. Think about it. If you're a factory director and you tell the government that production targets can't be met, you're accused of sabotage. If you're a general who admits to losing ground, you're demoted or worse. If you're a minister who questions the budget, you might fall out a window or mysteriously disappear. That's why every report looks positive. Every graph goes up. Every headline says Russia stronger than ever. But underneath that glossy image is rot. Industry starved of workers, wages eaten by inflation, and a labor market drained by mobilization. And here's the darkest irony: Putin's need to appear strong makes him weaker. The lies that protect him also trap him. Because if everyone tells you that you're winning, why would you stop? That's why Putin still talks about total victory. That's why he rejects every peace deal, because he believes his own propaganda. He genuinely thinks Ukraine is collapsing, that the West is divided, that time is on his side. And no one in his circle dares to tell him otherwise. We saw what happens when someone falls out of favor in this system. The case of Roman Starovoyt, Russia's transport minister, fired in the morning, dead by afternoon. Officially, it was suicide. Unofficially, it was a message. It told every official watching, loyalty is your only shield. Fail and you vanish. When fear becomes the operating system of a government, truth dies first. And without truth, decisions become deadly mistakes. That's why Russian soldiers are dying by the thousands in meaningless assaults. That's why factories keep producing outdated equipment. That's why Russia keeps losing generals and territories, because no one can admit what's actually happening. Even the Russian public lives in a manufactured reality. On television, they see maps glowing red with newly liberated zones, reports of Western collapse, and endless speeches about historical destiny. State media has become a machine of comfort, keeping the population calm, proud, and blind. And yet, cracks are appearing. Families are quietly asking why their sons haven't come home. Soldiers' wives are demanding answers about missing pay. Veterans return from the front wounded, disillusioned, and angry. They talk to neighbors. They whisper in markets. And slowly, the silence starts to tremble. But inside the Kremlin, Putin can't hear that tremor. He's surrounded by men who built their careers on his illusions. They depend on him and on the war to stay alive. If the fighting stops, so does their protection. This is what makes autocracies so dangerous. They can appear powerful right up until the moment they collapse. They keep fighting wars long after logic has died because the war becomes the only thing holding them together. So, when we ask, why won't Putin stop? Remember this. He's not hearing the truth. He's hearing the echo of his own lies. He's trapped in a hall of mirrors, one built by his generals, polished by his ministers, and guarded by fear. Every reflection tells him he's winning. Every voice tells him time is on his side. And by the time he realizes otherwise, it may be too late, not just for him, but for his entire country. Friends, in the next section, we'll explore how this delusion has turned Russia's economy into a war machine that cannot be turned off, how a nation that once dreamed of prosperity has become addicted to conflict, and why stopping the war now could collapse everything Putin has left. Friends, in this part of our story, we need to look beyond the battlefield. Because while soldiers fight and die in Ukraine, another kind of war is being waged inside Russia, an economic one. And the truth is, this war is not just destroying Ukraine's cities, it's quietly destroying Russia's future. When we talk about war economies, we often imagine factories roaring with production, workers busy around the clock, tanks rolling out of assembly lines. It sounds powerful, almost patriotic. But underneath that noise, there's something much darker, a system feeding on itself. Right now, Russia's entire economy has been redesigned not to live, not to grow, but to survive through war. In 2024, 1 out of every 3 rubles spent by the government went to the military. In 2025, that number will rise to nearly half. Half of all government spending going to weapons, ammunition, soldiers, and propaganda. Think about that for a moment. 40% of the national budget devoted to destruction. That's not sustainable. It's not growth. It's cannibalism. Every tank Russia builds is a tank that will be blown up. Every drone it produces will vanish in smoke. Every shell fired is money burned. The raw materials, the steel, the engines, the electronics, all of it turns into dust on the battlefield. And yet, this endless production is now the only thing keeping the economy alive. Factories that once made cars now make armored vehicles. Plants that built farm equipment now churn out artillery shells. Entire towns depend on war contracts to stay afloat. Workers get bonuses for faster weapon output. And the Kremlin celebrates that as economic strength. But it's not strength, it's addiction. When war becomes your main industry, peace becomes your collapse. If this war were to end tomorrow, hundreds of factories would close. Millions of workers would lose their income. Regional governors would face unemployment crisis. The illusion of stability that Putin's propaganda pushes so hard would crumble overnight. That's why peace feels more dangerous than war to the Russian government. War at least gives them a script, one where they can promise victory, heroism, and pride. Peace has no story to tell. And let's talk about the cost. Western sanctions have not crushed Russia overnight, but they've corroded it from the inside. The country now pays far more for imported goods, especially the technology it needs to build weapons. Machinery that once came from Germany now comes from China at a higher price. Components that used to be easy to find are now smuggled through middlemen, often at triple the cost. Russia's dependency on China has become absolute. Nearly half of its imports now come from Beijing. And every month that passes, that dependency deepens. But here's the bitter irony. While Putin boasts about his partnership without limits, China is quietly bleeding him dry. It sells him what he needs, but on its terms. It buys Russian oil at discount prices. It floods Russian markets with Chinese goods. It ensures that Russia never fully collapses, but also never fully recovers. It keeps Moscow alive, but weak, just the way Beijing wants it. And back home, inside Russia, cracks are spreading everywhere. Skilled workers are vanishing. Many have been drafted. Others have fled. Over 800,000 professionals, engineers, IT experts, doctors have left since the invasion began. The ones who remain are stretched thin. Inflation eats away at real wages. Food prices are up. Housing costs are rising. The central bank keeps hiking interest rates to contain the damage. People borrow more, save less, and quietly grow resentful. But they can't say it out loud. In some regions, local officials are forced to invent good news. They film videos of happy workers in war factories, loyal soldiers returning home, families grateful for government aid. It's a show meant to keep the illusion alive. But the illusion is breaking. Look closer and you'll see what the propaganda hides. Towns running out of young men, schools closing due to teacher shortages, hospitals short on staff because so many doctors were drafted. You'll see mothers lining up at military offices begging for information about their sons. You'll see veterans returning from the front with missing limbs and empty eyes, unable to find work, unable to live with what they've seen. And yet, the war machine demands more soldiers, more shells, more silence. This is what economists call the autocratic doom loop. The war sustains the economy sustains the war, and stopping either collapses both. If Russia ends the war, factories close, unemployment surges, and regional budgets fall apart. But if Russia continues the war, costs rise, inflation grows, and resources vanish. It's a trap, one of Putin's own making. He can't climb out of it. He can only keep walking deeper. Even his so-called growth numbers are misleading. Yes, some data shows GDP rising, but only because the government counts weapons production as economic output. In reality, living standards are falling. Private investment has dried up. Innovation has stalled. Russia isn't building a future. It's burning one to keep the present from collapsing. And the longer it goes on, the worse it gets, because war economies don't age gracefully. They implode. We saw this with the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, with Nazi Germany in the 1940s, with the United States during Vietnam. The pattern is always the same. The machine runs until it consumes itself. Russia is no exception. It's running faster, producing more, shouting louder, but every turn of that engine brings it closer to breaking. And what happens when it does? What happens when the money runs out, when the factories can't deliver, when China tightens the leash, when the lies can no longer hide the truth? That's when the political consequences explode. Because remember, this isn't just about economics. Behind every factory, every soldier, every budget line, there are people. Governors, ministers, officers, workers. And when a system built on fear begins to shake, they panic. In Russia today, even the elite are terrified. They know that when this war finally cracks, the fall will be brutal. There will be blame, purges, and retribution. There always is. So they do the only thing they can. They cling to the war that's destroying them. Friends, this is the tragedy of modern Russia. A nation with extraordinary potential, trapped by a leadership that can't stop fighting because war has become its oxygen. And that's why peace feels impossible. Because peace for this system is suffocation. But the story doesn't end there. In the next section, we'll go even deeper into the minds of Russia's leaders, the fear spreading among its elites, the purges, the paranoia, and the deaths that show just how fragile Putin's empire of loyalty has become. Friends, by now you've seen the outlines of this story. A leader trapped by his own war, a country addicted to conflict, and an economy held together by fear. But the most chilling part of this entire tragedy is not on the battlefield or in the factories. It's in the minds of the people who serve Vladimir Putin, because inside Russia's ruling circle, fear has become a way of life. Imagine waking up every morning as a high-ranking Russian official. You check your phone not for news, but for your name to see if you've been fired, exposed, or accused. You arrive at your office and wonder if this will be your last day in power or your last day, period. That is what loyalty feels like in Putin's Russia. Not devotion, but survival. We saw this fear made visible in one horrifying story. Roman Starovoyt, a government minister, was fired in the morning. By afternoon, he was dead. A single bullet. Officially, it was suicide. Unofficially, it was a message, a reminder to every minister, every governor, every general, fall out of favor, and you vanish. That's not a rumor. It's a pattern. Dozens of oligarchs, businessmen, and politicians have met the same fate since the invasion began. Mysterious falls, sudden illnesses, accidents that never add up. Each one quietly reinforces the same message. Fear keeps you loyal. And that fear has changed everything about how Russia's government works. When people fear punishment more than they value truth, honesty disappears. Reporting becomes fiction. Statistics become theater. Meetings become rituals of obedience. No one wants to be the bearer of bad news. No one wants to tell the president that things are falling apart. No one wants to say that Ukraine is winning battles or that the economy is rotting from within. So the truth is filtered, softened, rewritten, until it becomes comfortable enough for the leader to believe. That's why Putin thinks the war is going well. That's why he talks about victory as if it's just around the corner. The lies of his inner circle have become his reality. But this isn't just about the men in power. It's also about the hundreds of thousands of soldiers returning home from the front. Many of them are wounded. Many are traumatized. Many are angry. And they're coming back to a country that doesn't know what to do with them. These men were paid far more at war than they'll ever earn in peace. Their families depend on those paychecks. Their towns depend on those contracts. But if the war stops, that money stops. And when that happens, Russia will face something even Putin's propaganda can't hide. Hundreds of thousands of broken men trained to kill, abandoned by the state that used them. That's a recipe for chaos. A peaceful Russia would have to face the rage of its own veterans, the despair of its own workers, the grief of its own mothers. For a government built on fear, that kind of truth is unbearable. So instead, they keep the war going. Because as long as the fighting continues, everyone has a purpose. The generals have their missions, the factories have their contracts, the propagandists have their slogans, and the soldiers have their pay. Peace would end that illusion in an instant. Even Russia's state media knows this. That's why every newscast is carefully crafted to make the war look heroic and endless. Every loss becomes a tactical retreat. Every failure becomes a step toward victory. Every dead soldier is called a martyr. They keep people angry, proud, and distracted because anger is easier to control than despair. But fear like this can't hold forever. It eats through the system from within. You can see it in the quiet faces of officials at Kremlin meetings, the ones who avoid eye contact, who applaud at the wrong time, who nod too fast when Putin speaks. They know that at any moment, they could be the next example. This fear doesn't just paralyze leaders, it paralyzes the entire country. Governors delay decisions because they're scared of blame. Generals avoid initiative because they fear punishment. Bureaucrats hide failures until they become disasters. It's a government trapped in its own shadows, too terrified to act and too dishonest to stop. And here's the cruel irony. This fear, this paranoia, this endless suspicion is exactly what keeps the war alive. Because in such a system, war is safer than peace. As long as Russia is fighting, Putin can justify everything: censorship, arrests, purges, executions. He can call them security measures. He can label critics as traitors, journalists as foreign agents, and protesters as enemies of the state. War gives him cover. War gives him purpose. War gives him power. Peace, on the other hand, exposes everything: the lies, the corruption, the decay. It would force him to explain why thousands of Russian mothers have no sons, why billions of rubles disappeared into fortification projects that collapsed overnight, why his great victory turned into a national humiliation. That's why the Kremlin doesn't fear Western sanctions or NATO expansion. It fears silence, the silence that comes when the gunfire stops and there's no one left to blame. And the silence is coming slowly, inevitably. The cracks are widening. Soldiers are speaking out. Bloggers are turning cynical. Families are questioning the official stories. Even some state TV hosts have slipped up. Moments of hesitation, awkward pauses, subtle signs that the performance is becoming harder to maintain. But until that silence becomes a roar, the war will go on. Because every person in Putin's inner circle has the same nightmare: the day after peace. That's the day when all the lies collapse at once. When the generals have to explain their losses. When the ministers have to explain their budgets. When the oligarchs have to explain their fortunes. When Putin himself has to face the truth that peace will not make him a hero, it will make him exposed. So, friends, this war isn't just about borders or territory. It's about survival, not for Russia as a nation, but for the small group of men who rule it through fear. And that's why they will keep fighting, no matter how many lives it costs, no matter how many cities are destroyed, and no matter how isolated the country becomes. Because for them, peace is the real enemy. In our final part, we'll bring this all together: the politics, the economy, the fear, and the foreign influence. To reveal the full answer to the question we started with, why won't Putin stop the war? Friends, we've traveled deep into this story, from the battlefields of Ukraine to the dark halls of the Kremlin, through fear, lies, and broken promises. And now, at the end of this journey, one truth stands above all others. Vladimir Putin cannot stop this war. Not because he doesn't want to win, but because stopping means losing everything that keeps him in power. Think about what peace would really mean for him. It would mean admitting that the invasion failed, that Russia's special operation turned into a disaster that drained its army, its economy, and its soul. It would mean facing the mothers of the soldiers who never came home, the veterans who returned with nothing, the businessmen who went bankrupt, the citizens who now live in fear and silence. It would mean lifting the curtain on all the lies. And once those lies fall, so does the illusion of strength that has defined his rule for 25 years. So the war must continue. Not for victory, but for survival. Every speech Putin gives now sounds like a man trying to convince himself. He talks about destiny, about Russia's greatness, about how the West wants to destroy him. But behind those words, you can feel the desperation, the fear that if the guns ever go quiet, the truth will start to speak. And yet, friends, no war lasts forever. Even the mightiest empires eventually reach a breaking point. The Soviet Union did. Nazi Germany did. Every system built on lies eventually collapses under the weight of reality. The question is not if Russia's system will crack, but when and how many more lives will be lost before it does. Ukraine continues to fight, not just for its borders, but for an idea, the idea that nations have the right to exist freely without being crushed by the past. Europe continues to resist learning again what unity really means. And the rest of the world watches, reminded that in every era, there are leaders who choose destruction over honesty, war over truth, power over peace. Putin's war is not just about Ukraine. It's about fear, pride, and the refusal to face reality. It's about a man who built his empire on control and cannot imagine a world where control slips away. It's about a country that once dreamed of greatness, but now measures victory by how long it can deny the inevitable. So when we ask, why won't Putin stop? The answer is both simple and tragic, because he can't. Because the moment he does, the world he created of power, propaganda, and paranoia disappears. Friends, if there's one lesson in this story, it's this: truth always returns. It might take years, even decades, but it always comes back through cracks in the propaganda, through whispers of the people, through the courage of those who refuse to be silent. And when that truth finally reaches the Kremlin's gates, when fear turns into anger and silence turns into speech, that will be the day this war truly ends. Until then, the fight continues, not just in Ukraine, but in every place where truth is buried under lies. Friends, thank you for staying with me through this story. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because awareness is our best defense, and every voice that speaks truth makes the silence a little weaker.